You wake up one morning and look in the mirror. The face looks back at you. The apartment is yours. The job is yours. The life, by every measurable standard, belongs to you. And yet something is off, like you are watching yourself from the outside, like you stepped into someone else's story and kept going because no one noticed the switch. That feeling has a name, and the real answer for why it exists is far stranger than you think. It is called depersonalization, or disassociation, or existential estrangement. Psychologists have given it many names, but the experience is the same. You feel like a ghost in your own body, a passenger in your own mind. Present, but not quite here. Aware, but somehow behind glass. And here is what most people get wrong about it. They treat it like a glitch, a malfunction, a sign that something has gone terribly wrong with who they are. But it is not a glitch. It is a feature. One that your brain has been running for hundreds of thousands of years, long before the person in the mirror had a name. The psychologist Daphne Simeon, one of the world's leading researchers on depersonalization disorder, spent decades mapping this phenomenon. What she found was that the brain does not lose itself by accident. It steps back on purpose. The disconnection is deliberate. Your mind creates distance from the self when the self becomes too overwhelming to inhabit. It is a survival mechanism, a circuit breaker. And in the right context, it saves lives. Think about what your ancestors faced. Not the cozy version of prehistory with fires and storytelling. The real version. Constant threat, unpredictable violence, the death of children, the death of everything. To feel that fully, all the time, would break a person. So the brain evolved a valve. A way to turn down the volume on the self when reality becomes unbearable. You go somewhere else, even when you are standing right there. That is not a disorder. That is ancient engineering. Sheely unfamiliar. But here is the twist. You do not live in that world anymore. The threats are different now. The stressors are chronic rather than acute. They do not end. And your brain, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of responding to acute danger, does not know how to turn the valve back off when the danger never fully resolves. Research published in the journal Psychiatry Research found that depersonalization experiences are far more common than previously thought. A 2015 study by researcher Elaine Hunter at University College London found that roughly 1 in 4 people will experience a significant episode of feeling detached from themselves at some point in their life. 1 in 4. That is not a fringe condition. That is a near-universal feature of being human in the modern world. So why does modern life trigger it so often? The answer is pressure. Not the immediate kind, the ambient kind. The pressure of becoming someone, of performing a version of yourself that others can recognize, reward, and approve of. From the time you were a child, you were asked to be legible, to make sense, to have a consistent story about who you are and where you are going. And the self you built to answer that question, the professional self, the social self, the self who says the right things at the right times, that self is a construction. A very useful one, but a construction nonetheless. The philosopher and psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott called this the false self. It is the self that learns very early what the world wants from it. It adapts, it performs, it says yes when it means maybe and smiles when it means I am not sure. And over time this adapted self becomes so practiced, so automatic, that it starts to feel like the only self. The real self, what Winnicott called the true self, does not disappear. It goes quiet, it waits, and sometimes when the gap between the two becomes too wide, your brain signals the mismatch by making you feel like a stranger. The dissociation is not the problem. It is the alarm. The alarm is telling you something specific. It is telling you that the life you are living and the self doing the living have drifted apart. Not necessarily in a dramatic way, not necessarily in a way anyone else would notice, but internally below the level of words there is a gap. And your nervous system feels it even when your mind cannot name it. Neuroimaging studies support this. Research by psychiatrist Mauricio Sierra at King's College London showed that during episodes of depersonalization, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation, becomes hyperactive. It is literally suppressing the emotional centers of the brain. The self goes offline not because it broke down, but because the rational brain told it to stand down. You feel nothing, or you feel numb, or you feel like you are watching yourself, because your own brain decided that feeling things right now was too dangerous. This is important. It changes the question. The question is no longer what is wrong with me. The question becomes, what is my brain protecting me from feeling? Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes it is a life that does not fit anymore. Sometimes it is the slow accumulation of choices made for other people. Sometimes it is simply exhaustion. A nervous system that has been in performance mode for so long that it forgot there was ever another mode. And sometimes, honestly, it is just the sheer strangeness of being a conscious creature in a world that was not designed for consciousness. That second one is older than any of us, because the feeling of being a stranger in your own life is not new. It appears in the journals of Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who wrote about watching himself from a distance during the chaos of war. It appears in the letters of the philosopher Blaise Pascal, who described a terror so specific he called it the eternal silence of infinite spaces. It appears in almost every culture's spiritual tradition as a state of ego dissolution, sometimes sought, sometimes feared, always recognized. Your ancestors felt this too. The mirror has always been strange, the face has always been partially unfamiliar. What does change, generation by generation, is the story we tell about that strangeness. For most of human history, feeling detached from yourself was interpreted as a signal, a message from the body that something needed to change, or rest, or attention. In the modern world, we interpret it as pathology, as something to fix with productivity hacks and positive thinking and staying busy enough that the feeling cannot catch up. But the feeling is faster than the busyness. It always catches up. The most interesting finding from Simeon's research is what helps. Not medication, though that can play a role. Not therapy alone, though that matters too. What helps most, across case studies and clinical trials, is meaning. Not happiness, not achievement, meaning. The sense that the self doing the living is the same self choosing to live. That the distance between who you are and who you are pretending to be is not too wide to close. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. So when you look in the mirror tomorrow and the face looks slightly unfamiliar, do not panic. Do not diagnose yourself. Do not reach for your phone to fill the silence. Just notice. Notice that your brain is sending a signal that something underneath the surface is asking for attention. The stranger in the mirror is not the enemy. The stranger is the part of you that remembers what you actually wanted, before the world told you what to want instead. You built a life. That is not a small thing, but sometimes the life we build fits the person we were supposed to be, not the person we actually are. And the gap between those two people feels from the inside exactly like this. Exactly like waking up and wondering who is looking back. The face in the mirror has not changed. But maybe, finally, it is time to ask it a real question.